Every year there's a movie or two that comes out that I wasn't expecting, had never heard of, wasn't planning to go and see, that absolutely blows me out of the water. So far, for the year 2025, that movie was Sinners. Sinners was a movie I hadn't heard a lot about. It had Michael B. Jordan, one of the best actors working today, and the director was Ryan Coogler, one of the best directors working today. And I had seen the trailer for this movie once or twice in front of other movies in theaters, but it wasn't high up on my list of movies that I needed to go and see. But after seeing the reviews, hearing its praise, it became one of my more anticipated films, but count me as somebody who wasn't paying attention or just didn't read a lot about this movie, but when I learned that this was a vampire movie, I was even more on board. Any and all vampire movies are movies that I'm at the very least willing to give a shot. I'm one of the people who doesn't even hate Twilight that much because there are some cool vampire and werewolf scenes in those movies. I love vampires, I love all the creatures of the night, and I love when movies take risks involving these monsters, and that's exactly what Sinners does. Sinners is, oddly enough, like an updated version of something like 30 Days of Night. It takes a unique setting, likable characters, horror-themed vampires, and delivers a great story. But Sinners goes a step above, and almost delivers two movies at the same time. And in this video, I'm going to explain what I mean by that, give my thoughts and insight into the movie and this universe as a whole, and of course, talk about the vampires themselves. So let's open fire on a bunch of clan members, not invite people into our homes that are so obviously vampires, and open fire on a bunch of clan members as we talk about 2025's best movie so far, Sinners. So Sinners is really a movie that's a tale of two halves. The first half of this movie seems far more like a historical drama than anything, and the second half is that horror movie that a lot of people signed up for. For a lot of different reasons, people may not be too happy with the first half of the movie. I, for one, love seeing the first half of this movie, especially after multiple rewatches of this one. When you go in to watch a horror movie, you expect that the majority of the film is gonna keep you on the edge of your seat, give you a few jump scares, and make you walk past the dark hallways in your house a little bit faster. That's all well and good for something like Paranormal Activity or even The Conjuring, but Sinners is not that type of movie, and if that's what you expect going in, you're gonna be disappointed. The first half of this movie is all about setting up the world, the characters, and most importantly, the time period. Watching this movie with the point of view of our main characters, hearing Sammy ask the twins about how Chicago is, since it doesn't have the Jim Crow laws, hearing them say it's the same thing as the South, just with taller buildings, hearing Slim talk about one of his friends who was framed and killed even though he did everything that was asked of him, it really gave me a whole different feeling during the first half of the film, which is more historical than horror, but because it's historical, also makes it horror. Not necessarily for me or for many of you watching, but for other many of you watching, I'm sure this first half was far scarier than most other horror movies because it was based in reality. You've heard personal stories and just understand this far better than I ever could. But anyways, the intro of this movie explains the big magical aspect of this movie and how music can really bend space and time, but it also brings forth undesirables. This is a really fundamental part of this movie that you need to comprehend and understand, or really just go with if you don't understand it, because I remember the first time I watched this movie, I didn't hear this part, and it completely threw my head in a spiral later on. But afterwards, it also does the very typical horror movie thing, flash to the future, and then cut back 24 hours earlier to see how everything went wrong. But what's more interesting, knowing that this is a vampire movie, is Sammy only goes into the church when he's invited in. So as an audience, we're immediately questioning what's going on with Sammy right at the very start and what actually happened to him and what happened to everybody else. And that leads me to... I'm just gonna get a few things out of the way early so I'm not constantly praising them throughout this entire video. The soundtrack by Ludwig Göransson, absolutely incredible. The acting of Michael B. Jordan ×2 is incredible, as well as the entirety of the cast, like Sammy, who was in his first role and absolutely killed it. The writing, both in terms of dialogue and structure for a horror movie, are both great. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about some of the things that bothered me. Number one being the aspect ratio. The switch from the IMAX cameras to the regular cameras is particularly jarring in this film. The cuts aren't very well hidden, and it just doesn't seem to have any particular motivation, at least not for the first half of the film. There would just be some scenes in IMAX and some not, with no rhyme or reason between the two. The second half does a much better job with this, both for the bigger scenes that are filmed in IMAX, but also the switch in aspect ratio. It's happened less and less since I've watched this movie more, but on my first viewing, I really thought that there were a few scenes in the first half that just didn't need to be here. It seems like every scene they filmed was in this movie, and in some instances, that was great for character or world building, but in other instances, I felt like they could have gotten to the real meat of the story a bit quicker. I still feel that way now, but definitely to a much lesser degree the more I've watched this movie. Very early on, the story separates Smoke and Stack, both to show us more about who they are and the side characters they come across, but also to split up Michael B. Jordan so it's easier to film. Smoke teaching the girl about haggling for a better price is such a great scene because it shows that while these brothers might be known as big bad people in the town, Smoke is still trying to help the people in this community, particularly children. It also shows a lot about Grace's character later on in the same scene and how strong she is to haggle with Smoke. Smoke then goes to visit his son's grave and the son's mother, Annie, who's a very interesting character that I'll get to later, but she's the same woman who tells us about the powerful music in the beginning. She has a shop of, I'll say, unregulated items. Well, that's not really it. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that Annie is a witch. The camera has a strange effect when she gets angry, hinting that there's something true to her practice, despite Smoke saying that he's been all over the world and doesn't believe in any of it. He tries to give her some real money, but she refuses and takes what the kids gave her instead. Stack, on the other hand, tells Sammy that Smoke killed their father and that the guitar was some famous person's that they won from him. He's also not as talented as haggling for a price as Smoke is, getting Slim to come down and play at the sawmill for the night, but for a much higher price than he initially asked for. We also meet Mary, who's in town for her mother's funeral, and who clearly has a background with Stack, but he doesn't really want to deal with her. And in the scene, we think that he just wants to shoo her off because she's just some girl he hooked up with, but that ultimately ends up not being true. Basically, even in their individual scenes, we get the impression that Smoke and Stack, despite being incredibly loyal to one another, aren't that great of people, and their reputation around town lives up to who they really are, but we're still given hints that there's more to them than meets the eye. Smoke had lost a child, and Stack had wanted to have a life in the future with Mary, or so she claims, but he ended up going in a different direction. The first really big change in tone comes from this strange point of view with a man burning in the sun, arriving at a house of Klan members and a group of Native Americans coming to look for him. Wait a minute, Native Americans hunting vampires? Is this secretly a Twilight prequel? This scene just seems so out of left field. Why was he burning in the sun? Oh, okay, never mind. When the night begins, we get to learn more about each of the primary characters. Smoke is very adamant that allowing people to purchase drinks and food with their plantation credits is bad business, but both Stack and Annie aren't as great with their money, therefore not as adamant about having them pay in cash. We also learn how actually involved Stack and Mary really were. She's not a bitter ex or anything like that. She loves Stack and wants to be with him, and so does he, but he wants her to have a better and safer life without him. Smoke and Annie are in a similar ordeal, and we see that both Smoke and Stack aren't actually evil men. They just believe that they are, and they push everybody else away from them so that way they can all live better lives. Then there's the big one shot of Sammy singing and bringing the spirits and sounds of the past and future together. Now this is the scene I was talking about that really threw me for a loop the first time I watched it, because I don't know, I wasn't paying attention during the opening scene, or I just walked in late. This scene just felt so out of left field. Even after multiple watches, it still kinda takes me out of it. I mean, the first half of this movie is more or less a historical drama, and then now there's just girls twerking on screen. This obviously has plot relevance. It's an excellently choreographed scene, very impressive, but I just can't help how it takes me out of the movie every time I see it. This is also really the point in the film where everything changes, from a drama to a horror. And while there's definitely a fair share of horrific scenes, I'd actually go as far as to say that this is more survival horror than just flat-out horror. When Remick comes up and asks to see inside, both Stack and Cornbread are entertaining the idea of letting him in, while Smoke is adamant that he doesn't come in, which is both foreshadowing to these two joining Remick, but also just shows how much Smoke didn't want to let them in. For a man so hell-bent on running a business, the fact that he turns Remick and the others away means that he didn't trust them, and for good reason. Smoke tells Sammy to stay and make church music and to be with the good people. Let the bad people, like Smoke and Stack, handle the other stuff in the world, but that's not what Sammy wants to do. Smoke even threatens him, but both the audience and Sammy know that this is a pretty empty threat. Both Smoke and Stack are very aware of who they are. They're aware of the bad things they've done, and they don't want that life for anybody else. It's a selfless act by them, even though it comes across as selfish to everybody around them. But there comes a time where the others, who aren't that great with money, realize they're still missing out on some revenue, so Mary goes to see if Remick and the others are actually good people. Spoiler alert, they aren't, and Mary returns a while later. And this is where, as an audience member, you just know that we're moments away from all hell breaking loose. We very quickly get the scene that Josh Allen absolutely loves.
Yeah, it was awesome. It's a different world, a very cool experience. I'm so excited for her and so proud of her, and it's getting some great reviews. It's a fantastic movie.
Which ultimately ends with Stack's death. Stack's death is very tragic for a number of reasons. There's, of course, Michael B. Jordan's acting, ×2, everybody else's reaction, but also knowing that he's coming back and how that's going to be even worse for all of them. After all this transpires, they send everybody home, unknowingly giving Remick an army to pin them inside with. But Annie proves to be an incredibly smart horror movie character, immediately putting the pieces together, talking about how Mary said we will be coming back, and how they need to move his body outside. She's even eventually the one who actually correctly guesses that they're vampires. There's a montage sequence of Annie preparing everybody for the vampires, needing wood, holy water, garlic, and silver. This is a great scene. It's nice that the movie is aware that the audience is aware of vampire lore, and we can kind of just skip past all of this in a montage sequence. It doesn't need that much explaining. Tensions rise with Cornbread, who's coming back and trying to come inside, Stack waking up, and even a misdirect whodunit by finding a dead body, putting it outside, and everybody eating a clove of garlic. We think that Pearline or Slim are vampires, judging by their reactions to the garlic, but ultimately, it wasn't even blood, meaning that no one is a vampire, unfortunately for the guy outside. After this, we get the really big insight into Remick's character, and I think that Remick is one of the best villains I've seen in a very long time. The best thing about any villain is when they believe what they're doing is right, and if you can kind of see where they're coming from. Remick says that he wants to spread around kindness and unite everybody together, which is something that a lot of people can get behind. The way in which he does it is what makes him evil, but then he also talks about how he's saving them from the Klan, who really set this whole thing up. You want to think that he's lying, and you aren't sure if he is or not, even when Stack comes over and agrees with him that what he was saying is correct. You still don't quite know if you can trust him or not. He also wants Sammy because his music would be able to transport him back to his time so that way he could see the people he misses and loves. It's a solid villain motivation, and he makes for an incredibly memorable villain. The third act turns action heavy, and the action in this movie is all very solid. Grace yells for them to come in, which of course kills a majority of all of them, but it's also what ends up saving the town, because had she not done that, Remick would have moved to the town. He even promises this to Grace by talking about going after her daughter. So as dumb as this seems, it's also what saves everyone. The scene's also great because there's like no plot armor for these characters, maybe besides Smoke and Sammy, but everybody else just dies. Seeing Smoke versus Stack is a very emotional scene, and seeing Remick in what is like his ultimate form is horrifying. There's also a lot about religion in this movie. It's talked about how it was forced upon the people in the community, not like how music and the blues was with them from the start, as Slim says. But religion is also kind of what saves Sammy by buying him a little bit of time. Remick repeating the lines to him also kind of reminds me of 30 Days of Night and how the guy says,
Please, God, please.
No, God.
And of course, Sammy eventually kind of rejects God overall and follows his own path. So there's a bit of mixed feelings about religion in this movie overall, enough for anybody who is religious or isn't religious to kind of come to their own conclusions about what it means to them. And of course, Remick ends up being right, because the clan does show up the next day, and Smoke takes all of them out. This is supposed to be the kick-ass booyah moment of the movie. I've seen some people criticize it for Smoke leaving his position and going out into the open, and yeah, it's a bit dumb, it's a bit unrealistic, but Smoke also doesn't expect to survive this. This is all purposeful so that way Smoke can get his revenge, but also so they can have these cool shots for the trailer. And for Annie in the afterlife to say that she doesn't want any of the smoke to get onto their new baby is just such excellent writing. It's so layered, and this is like one of my favorite lines of this movie for sure. I particularly like how the credits and the actual ending are woven together, and for it to seem like such a menacing scene only for it to turn into old friends reuniting and Stack actually trying to heal him or offer to heal him says a lot about these two as vampires and as family to Sammy, and how much they've all grown. It's a pretty heartwarming end to the story, and really brings everything about the movie full circle. So of course, I have to talk more about the vampires, because not only does this movie show us the more horror side of vampires, which I love, but it also adds a lot of new rules and lore to the vampires that we haven't seen before. There's the typical, you have to be invited inside, but oddly enough, you don't have to be invited in by the actual owner, which I thought was for sure going to be part of the story because of the emphasis made on Smoke and Stack buying the sawmill, but that ended up not being the case. There's also the fact that garlic burns them, which is again a popular piece of vampire lore, but actually a pretty forgotten one in recent years. I think it's because it seems very random for it to be garlic that hurts vampires, so this is often replaced by something else like vervain from the Vampire Diaries, but I think garlic really works for this movie. And this of course makes for a great scene with the cloves of garlic being passed around. Rounding out the typical vampire stuff, we have things like wooden stakes and holy water. This all makes sense, but the odd one out is silver, which is most commonly associated with being a weakness to werewolves. Again, I think it works in this story, especially with the piece of Sammy's guitar being made out of silver and that being one of the final blows to Remick, but it was one of the more interesting twists of lore. There's some small additions or characteristics, like how they all drool this clear liquid, but one of the most unique things about the Sinners vampires is their shared consciousness and abilities. When Remick first showed up with his new vampires, I was like, oh wow, lucky for him that he found 2 musicians to turn into vampires. But that ended up not being the case. With every new person turned, a new ability is gained for the vampires, and a new set of knowledge is given to everyone. Remick speaks fluent Mandarin to Grace, something he hadn't previously known, and he of course ends up being right about the clan members coming to kill everybody in the morning, because that's what he learned from the first two people he turned. Because of this shared consciousness, it also means that these vampires work as a sort of hive mind, so whatever is paining Remick also pains everybody else. And now I think this works thematically because Remick's whole purpose is to try and unite everybody together, but if you've seen a lot of my other videos, you probably know I'm not a huge fan of the hive mind trope. I think it's overall just very overplayed. Even if this movie does give a good reason for it to be here, it's just overall not my favorite. But the most interesting thing about these vampires to me is how they're able to feel the emotions and trauma of people around them. This one isn't explicitly stated like a lot of the others, but with things like Remick knowing all about Mary's situation and correctly guessing all about her trauma, and even Stack smelling Sammy in the future and knowing he doesn't have much time left, it gives some interesting insight to these vampires. And I wish that this movie had actually delved deeper into this characteristic, because I think there's a lot more opportunities with this power than the movie actually got to, even if this piece of lore or power is essentially responsible for Remick targeting Sammy and the sawmill in the first place. This movie has everything that I love. Great writing, characters, music. It makes me think differently and gives me a unique perspective, has good scares, good action, so I'm giving Sinners a 9.2 out of 10. It's my favorite film of 2025 so far, maybe other than Weapons. I wrote this before I saw Weapons, so yeah, those are my two favorites so far. What are your thoughts on Sinners? And what would you want this rumored sequel that's been making headlines lately to be about? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe for more videos like this. Special thanks to all my channel members, and I'll see you all in the next one.